The grand hall of the River City Convention Center sparkled under crystal chandeliers. Men in tailored tuxedos and women draped in designer gowns mingled, their laughter mixing with the soft classical music floating through the air. This was the annual Children's Hospital Charity Gala, where the city's wealthiest gathered to show off their generosity and their status. Among the sea of wealthy guests, the waitstaff moved like shadows nearly invisible despite their crisp black and white uniforms. Emily Chen was one of these shadows. At 19, she was younger than most of the other servers. Her dark hair pulled back in a neat bun, her eyes constantly scanning for empty glasses or discarded napkins. Unlike the other staff who had been doing this job for years, this was only Emily's third week. She needed the money desperately. 6 months ago, her dad had suffered a heart attack. The medical bills had piled up quickly, forcing her to put her music studies on hold. The prestigious conservatory scholarship she'd worked so hard for wouldn't wait forever. But family came first. Table 6 needs champagne refills, her supervisor whispered as they passed each other. Emily nodded, balancing her tray carefully as she made her way to the drink station. As Emily filled flutes with golden bubbling liquid, she couldn't help but steal glances at the grand piano sitting in the corner of the hall. No one was playing it tonight. The gala organizers had opted for recorded classical music instead. Her fingers itched to touch those keys, to feel the smooth ivory beneath her fingertips. It had been weeks since she'd played on a real piano, making do with her second-hand electronic keyboard in the tiny apartment she shared with her dad. With a tray full of champagne, Emily weaved through the crowd toward table 6. She moved carefully, eyes focused on keeping the glasses from spilling as guests shifted unpredictably around her. That's when she heard it, a cold voice cutting through the pleasant chatter. I don't care if it takes all night. Fix it. The man's tone was steel wrapped in silk. Emily glanced toward the voice and nearly stumbled. Everyone in River City knew Alexander Blackwood, at least by reputation. The tech billionaire rarely appeared in public, preferring to rule his empire from behind closed doors. His company, Blackwood Innovations, had transformed modern communications, making him one of the richest men in the country before he'd even turned 35. He stood with his back to her, tall and broad-shouldered in a perfectly tailored tuxedo, dark hair neatly trimmed. He was speaking into his phone, completely ignoring the gala happening around him. I don't want excuses, he continued, his voice quiet but somehow more threatening for it. I want results. Emily tried to give him a wide berth as she approached table 6, but the crowd suddenly shifted. A woman in a red dress bumped into Emily's elbow, sending her slightly off balance. She corrected quickly, but not before one champagne flute tipped, sending a splash of the cold liquid directly onto the back of Alexander Blackwood's expensive jacket. The entire room seemed to freeze. Alexander turned slowly, his phone conversation forgotten as he lowered the device from his ear. His eyes, a sharp, icy blue, locked onto Emily. I'm so sorry, sir, Emily said immediately, setting her tray down on the nearest table. She grabbed a clean napkin from her apron. Please, let me... Don't touch me, he said, his voice dangerously quiet. Emily stopped, napkin in hand, feeling the heat of embarrassment crawl up her neck. Around them, people had started to stare. Do you have any idea how much this costs? Alexander asked, gesturing to his suit jacket. More than you'd make in a month. Emily swallowed hard but stood her ground. I apologize for the accident, sir. If you give me your contact information, I can arrange for the dry cleaning bill to be covered. A hint of surprise flickered across his face, quickly replaced by cold annoyance. Most people cowered when he used that tone. This girl, barely more than a child, was looking him straight in the eye. What's your name? He demanded. Emily Chen, sir. Well, Emily Chen, perhaps you should find a job that requires fewer motor skills. Several nearby guests snickered, and Emily felt her cheeks burn. Still, she kept her spine straight and her gaze steady. Alexander, that's quite enough. The voice came from behind him, aged but commanding. A small elderly woman approached, leaning slightly on a polished wooden cane. Despite her size and age, something about her presence made even Alexander Blackwood straighten up slightly. Grandmother, he acknowledged, his tone softening just a fraction. Sophia Blackwood was a legend in her own right. The family matriarch had helped build the original Blackwood empire alongside her late husband. Even in her 80s, she remained on the board of directors. and rumor had it she was the only person Alexander truly listened to. It was clearly an accident, Sophia said, her keen eyes assessing Emily. And the young lady has apologized. There's no need for cruelty. Alexander's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Years of conditioning had taught him not to argue with his grandmother in public. I am sorry about my grandson's manners. Dear, Sophia said to Emily. He works too much and forgets how to behave in polite society. She gave Alexander a pointed look. It's all right, ma'am, Emily replied, still clutching the unused napkin. The fault was mine. Nonsense, Sophia waved her hand dismissively. What's your name, child? Emily Chen, ma'am. Emily, Sophia repeated, studying her with interest. Tell me, do you enjoy your work here? The question caught Emily off guard. She hesitated, aware of Alexander's cold stare. I'm grateful for the opportunity, ma'am. It helps pay the bills. Something in her honest answer seemed to please the old woman. I see. And what would you rather be doing if bills were not a concern? Emily's eyes involuntarily darted to the grand piano in the corner. The brief glance wasn't missed by Sophia's sharp eyes. Sophia smiled. A musician? I was studying piano at the conservatory, Emily admitted. I'm taking a break right now. Alexander made a small sound that might have been disbelief or dismissal. His grandmother shot him another quelling look. We're hosting a small gathering at the estate next weekend, Sophia announced. Perhaps you would join us, Emily Chen. Emily's eyes widened in shock. Alexander looked equally stunned. Grandmother, I don't think... he began. It wasn't a suggestion, Alexander. Sophia cut him off smoothly. She turned back to Emily. Saturday, 7 o'clock. I'll have someone send you the details. Before Emily could formulate a response, a gala organizer approached, drawing Sophia's attention away. Mrs. Blackwood, we're ready for your speech whenever you are. Thank you, I'll be right there. Sophia nodded to Emily. Saturday, dear. Don't disappoint me. As the elderly woman walked away, Emily found herself alone with Alexander Blackwood. The cold fury in his eyes made her stomach knot. My grandmother is being polite, he said in a low voice. But make no mistake, you don't belong in our world. If you're smart, you'll find an excuse not to come. With that, he turned and walked away, leaving Emily standing there with a damp napkin and an invitation she never expected. Chen, her supervisor hissed from nearby. What are you doing? Get back to work. The rest of the night passed in a blur. Emily went through the motions, serving drinks, clearing plates, avoiding eye contact with Alexander Blackwood whenever he came into view. But her mind kept returning to Sophia's invitation and the grand piano in the Blackwood mansion she'd seen featured in architecture magazines. When Emily finally returned to her small apartment just past midnight, she tried to be quiet, but a light clicked on in the living room as she entered. You're back late, her father said. He sat in his recliner, a book open on his lap. Though the heart attack had weakened him, Li Chen was slowly regaining his strength. His doctor had finally cleared him for part-time work, which would help with the bills, but they were still drowning in debt. Busy night, Emily replied, setting down her bag and slipping off her shoes. How are you feeling? Better every day, he assured her with a smile that didn't quite hide his fatigue. Any interesting stories from the land of the rich and famous? Emily hesitated, then sat on the arm of the sofa. Actually, I spilled champagne on Alexander Blackwood. Her father's eyes widened. The Alexander Blackwood? The tech billionaire? Emily nodded. And then his grandmother invited me to their house on Saturday. Her father stared at her for a long moment, then burst out laughing. Only you, Emily. Only you could spill a drink on one of the richest men in the country and end up with an invitation instead of a firing. Despite her exhaustion, Emily smiled. His grandmother seemed nice. He definitely wasn't. Are you going to go? Her father asked, curiosity evident in his voice. Emily thought about Alexander's cold eyes and cutting words. Then she thought about the piano she'd glimpsed in magazine photos of the Blackwood estate, a stunning Steinway grand that probably cost more than their entire apartment building. Think I will, she said softly. Something tells me I should. What Emily didn't know then was that her decision would change the course of not only her life, but Alexander Blackwood's as well. The champagne spill was just the first note in a composition neither of them saw coming. A piece that would break through walls built by privilege and pain, revealing the human hearts beating beneath. Saturday evening arrived too quickly. Emily stood at the wrought iron gates of the Blackwood estate, second-guessing her decision to come. The house, or rather mansion, sat at the end of a long tree-lined driveway, its windows glowing warmly against the darkening sky. It was exactly as grand as she'd imagined, with its stone facade and manicured gardens stretching in every direction. She'd spent hours debating what to wear, finally settling on a simple navy blue dress she'd bought 2 years ago for her conservatory audition. It wasn't designer, but it was the nicest thing she owned. Her dad had insisted on paying for a taxi to bring her here, despite her protests about the expense. "You can't show up on the bus," he'd said, pressing the cash into her hand. "Just this once, let's pretend we can afford it. Now," as the security guard checked her name against a list and the massive gate swung open, Emily wished she'd listened to Alexander Blackwood's warning and stayed home. The driveway seemed to stretch forever. Emily walked slowly, taking deep breaths to calm her nerves. Why had Mrs. Blackwood invited her? Was this some kind of elaborate setup to humiliate her further? The question swirled in her mind as she approached the front entrance, where a butler in a formal suit waited. "Miss Chen?" he asked politely. Emily nodded, unable to find her voice. "Please follow me. The guests are gathering in the main hall." The butler led her through an entrance hall with ceilings so high they disappeared into shadows. Artwork that probably belonged in museums hung on the walls. The marble floor echoed with each step of her modest heels. They passed through several rooms, each more impressive than the last, before reaching a set of double doors. The butler pushed them open, revealing a space that made Emily freeze in her tracks. The main hall was 3 stories high, with a sweeping staircase and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the gardens. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over about 30 well-dressed guests who mingled with champagne flutes in hand. But what made Emily's heart skip wasn't the opulence of the room or the famous faces she recognized from magazines. It was the piano. In the center of the room, positioned to be the focal point, sat a magnificent Steinway grand piano. The black lacquer gleamed under the chandelier light. Its lid propped open like a massive wing. Emily's fingers tingled at the sight of it. "Miss Emily Chen," the butler announced, drawing several curious glances in her direction. Emily barely heard him. Her eyes were locked on the instrument, a model she'd only ever dreamed of playing. She'd practiced on upright pianos at school, played on decent grands at recitals, but never something of this caliber. An instrument that probably cost more than her entire education. "Ah, you came." Sophia Blackwood's voice broke through Emily's trance. The elderly woman approached, leaning on her cane but moving with surprising speed. "I'm so pleased you accepted my invitation." Emily tore her gaze away from the piano. "Thank you for inviting me, Mrs. Blackwood. Your home is beautiful. Call me Sophia, dear. And yes, it's rather excessive, isn't it?" The old woman's eyes twinkled with mischief. "But we all have our indulgences. Mine happens to be architecture." A server appeared with a tray of drinks. Sophia took 2 champagne flutes and handed one to Emily with a wink. "Perhaps best if you drink it this time rather than wear it." Emily felt her cheeks warm but managed a smile. "I'll do my best. Come, let me introduce you to some people who won't bore you to tears with talk of stock portfolios," Sophia said, gently taking Emily's elbow. For the next half hour, Emily was guided through conversations with various guests. Most seemed surprised by her presence but were polite enough not to question it openly. Sophia introduced her simply as a talented young friend, offering no explanation for how they knew each other. Throughout the conversations, Emily found her gaze repeatedly drawn to the piano. Each time she quickly looked away, trying not to be obvious. But after the 4th or 5th glance, she realized Sophia had noticed. "It's quite something, isn't it?" the old woman said quietly. "It's magnificent," Emily admitted. "Is it? Do you play?" Sophia shook her head. "No, not me. That was my daughter-in-law's piano." "Alexander's mother." Her eyes grew distant. "Clara was a concert pianist before she married my son. She could have played in any concert hall in the world, but she gave it up to raise Alexander." "What happened to her?" Emily asked, then immediately regretted it. "I'm sorry, that was too personal." "It's all right," Sophia sighed. "She died when Alexander was 13. Cancer. It was very difficult for everyone, especially Alexander. They were extremely close." Emily's heart ached at the thought. She couldn't imagine losing her father, especially as a teenager. "The piano has sat mostly untouched since then," Sophia continued. Alexander keeps it perfectly maintained, but no one plays it. Before Emily could respond, the temperature in the room seemed to drop. Alexander Blackwood had appeared at the top of the staircase, surveying the gathering below like a king assessing his subjects. His gaze swept the room until it landed on Emily, and his expression hardened. He descended the stairs slowly, greeting guests with practiced charm that never quite reached his eyes. People parted for him as he moved through the crowd, drawn to his power yet wary of his cold demeanor. He made his way to his grandmother, pointedly ignoring Emily. "Grandmother," he kissed Sophia's cheek. "I see our unique guest has arrived. Yes, isn't it wonderful?" Sophia replied sweetly, though her eyes held a warning. "Emily and I were just discussing Clara's piano." Something flashed across Alexander's face, pain quickly masked by irritation. His gaze flickered to Emily, then to the piano, then back to Emily. "Were you?" he said, voice dangerously soft. Emily wished the floor would open and swallow her. "Your grandmother mentioned your mother was a pianist. The instrument is beautiful." "It's not a museum piece to be admired," Alexander said coldly. "It's a musical instrument meant to be played by someone with actual talent." A hush fell over the nearest guests who had overheard the exchange. Emily felt every eye turned toward her, watching the drama unfold. Sophia opened her mouth, likely to scold her grandson, but Alexander wasn't finished. His lips curved into what might have been mistaken for a smile if not for the ice in his eyes. "Since you seem so fascinated by my mother's piano," he said loudly enough for everyone to hear, "perhaps you'd honor us with a demonstration of your talents, Miss Chen?" The room went completely silent. Emily's heart pounded in her chest. This was it, the humiliation he'd been planning. Force the waitress to embarrass herself in front of River City's elite. "Alexander," Sophia said sharply, "that's quite enough." But Emily had already made her decision. She handed her barely touched champagne to a nearby server and straightened her shoulders. "I'd be happy to play," she said, meeting Alexander's cold stare with quiet determination. "If you're sure you don't mind someone else using your mother's piano." Something uncertain flickered in his eyes, as if he hadn't expected her to accept the challenge. "By all means." He gestured toward the instrument with mock graciousness. "Though perhaps something simple would be best. Chopsticks, perhaps? Or is that too advanced?" Several guests tittered nervously. Emily ignored them, walking toward the piano with outward calm that belied her racing heart. As she approached the magnificent instrument, everything else faded away. The watching eyes, Alexander's cruelty, even her own fear. This was a Steinway Model D Concert Grand, the same model used in major concert halls worldwide, an instrument most pianists only dreamed of playing. Emily sat on the bench, adjusting its height slightly. The keys were pristine ivory and ebony, cool beneath her fingertips as she positioned her hands. She closed her eyes for a moment, centering herself. What should she play? Something to match her anger at Alexander? Something to prove her skill? No. Something honest. Her fingers began to move. The opening notes of Chopin's Ballade No. 1 in G minor filled the room, soft and questioning at first, like a voice speaking in the darkness. Emily had been working on the piece before her father's heart attack, before she'd had to leave the conservatory. It was considered one of the most challenging pieces in piano literature, requiring both technical mastery and emotional depth. As she played, Emily forgot where she was. She forgot about the wealthy audience, about Alexander's cruel challenge, about the expense of the instrument beneath her fingers. There was only the music, the story it told of hope and longing, of struggle and transcendence. The piece built gradually, growing more complex, more demanding. Emily's fingers flew across the keys, drawing out colors and textures that showcased the piano's magnificent voice. When she reached the thunderous climax, she poured all her frustration and determination into each chord, each run, each delicate trill. She hadn't played on a real piano in months, let alone an instrument of this caliber. Yet somehow her fingers remembered every note, every nuance. The music poured out of her like water breaking through a dam, unstoppable and pure. As the final notes faded, Emily opened her eyes, suddenly remembering where she was. The room remained completely silent. She turned slowly on the bench to face the crowd, bracing herself for their reaction. What she saw instead was Alexander Blackwood's face, drained of all color. He stared at her as if seeing a ghost, his composure completely shattered, his cold mask replaced by naked shock and something that looked almost like pain. And in that moment, looking into his eyes, Emily understood. She hadn't just played a difficult piece well, she had unknowingly played his mother's signature piece. The silence that followed Emily's performance seemed to stretch forever. She remained seated at the piano, hands now resting in her lap, heart pounding. The guests stood frozen, champagne glasses halfway to their lips, conversations forgotten. Then, like a wave breaking against the shore, the applause began. Hesitant at first, then growing into thunderous acclaim, people were smiling, whispering to one another, some even dabbing at their eyes. An older gentleman in the corner gave her a standing ovation. Everyone seemed moved by her playing, everyone except Alexander Blackwood. He stood exactly where she'd left him, rigid as a statue. The color had drained from his face, and for a brief moment, his carefully crafted mask had slipped, revealing something raw underneath. Pain, anger, Emily couldn't quite tell. But as the applause continued, his expression hardened once more, jaw clenching visibly. Without a word, he turned and walked away, disappearing through a side door. The guests seemed confused by his abrupt departure, but Sophia quickly took control, approaching the piano with a gentle smile. "That was extraordinary, my dear," she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Wouldn't you all agree?" More applause followed. People began to approach Emily, introducing themselves, asking where she'd studied, how long she'd played. She answered their questions politely, but her mind kept returning to Alexander's face, to that flash of unguarded emotion she'd glimpsed. "Clara would have loved your interpretation," a voice said quietly. Emily turned to find a tall, distinguished man in his 60s standing beside her. His silver hair was neatly combed, and though his face showed the lines of age, there was a kindness in his eyes that immediately put Emily at ease. "Thomas Blackwood," he introduced himself, extending his hand. "Alexander's father. And Clara's husband." Emily felt her cheeks warm as she shook his hand. "I'm so sorry if I overstepped. I didn't know it was her piece." Thomas shook his head. "No apology needed. That piano was meant to be played." He glanced in the direction Alexander had gone. "My son, however, has strong feelings about who should touch it." "I understand," Emily said, though she didn't, not really. "It must hold many memories for him." "Too many, perhaps," Thomas sighed. "Clara used to play that Chopin piece at every major concert. It became something of a signature for her." Alexander would sit in the front row, completely mesmerized. His gaze grew distant. "After she died, he refused to let anyone play it. Said no one could do it justice." Emily's stomach tightened with guilt. "I had no idea. I should go apologize to him." Thomas studied her face. "You know, I think that might actually be a good idea. Not because you owe him an apology, you don't, but because—" He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "It's been a very long time since anyone has made my son feel anything so deeply." He pointed toward the door Alexander had used. "That hallway leads to the east wing. Last door on the left is Clara's study. That's where he'll be." Emily hesitated, looking around at the party. Guests were watching her with curious eyes, some still discussing her performance. Sophia was deep in conversation with a group near the fireplace. "Go on," Thomas encouraged. "I'll make your excuses to anyone who asks." Taking a deep breath, Emily slipped away from the main hall, following Thomas's directions. The hallway was lined with family photographs, sailing trips, ski vacations, formal portraits. She slowed as she passed them, noticing how Alexander's smile became rarer in the photos as he aged. In the most recent ones, he didn't smile at all. She reached the end of the hallway, stopping before a heavy wooden door. For a moment, she considered turning back. What could she possibly say to a man who clearly despised her? But some instinct pushed her forward. She knocked gently. No response. She knocked again, a little louder this time. "Mr. Blackwood." "It's Emily Chen." Silence stretched on so long that Emily nearly gave up. Then just as she turned to leave, she heard his voice. "Come in." Emily pushed open the door. The room beyond was smaller than she expected, intimate rather than grand. Bookshelves lined the walls, filled with volumes on music theory, biographies of composers, and stacks of sheet music. A comfortable-looking sofa sat near the window, and a small desk occupied one corner. But what drew Emily's eye was the collection of framed programs and posters from concerts around the world, all featuring Clara Blackwood. Alexander stood with his back to her, looking out the window into the darkness beyond. He held a crystal tumbler of amber liquid that caught the light when he raised it to his lips. "I owe you an apology," Emily said quietly, closing the door behind her. Alexander turned slightly, just enough to glance at her over his shoulder. "For what exactly? Showing up where you don't belong? Or for putting on that little performance?" His words stung, but Emily stood her ground. "For playing your mother's piece without knowing what it meant to you. Your father just told me." "Of course he did." Alexander's laugh was brittle. "My family seems determined to share our personal history with the hired help tonight." Emily flinched. "I should go. Why did you come?" he asked suddenly, turning to face her fully. "To this house. To this room. What do you want?" The direct question caught Emily off guard. "I came because your grandmother invited me. And you jumped at the chance to see how the other half lives?" His voice dripped with disdain. "No." Emily met his gaze steadily. "I came because she was kind to me when you weren't, and because I wanted to play that piano from the moment I saw it in a magazine feature about your home 3 years ago." Something flickered in Alexander's eyes, surprise perhaps, at her honesty. "As for why I came to this room," Emily continued, "I wanted to apologize. But clearly that was a mistake." She turned to leave, but his voice stopped her. "Wait." Emily paused, her hand on the doorknob. "How long have you played?" Alexander asked, his tone less hostile than before. "Since I was 5, Emily replied without turning around. "My mother started teaching me before she died. After that, my dad worked extra shifts to pay for lessons." "And now?" There was genuine curiosity in his question. Emily turned back to face him. "Now I work as a waitress to help pay my father's medical bills. The conservatory scholarship is on hold until I can afford to go back." Alexander studied her for a long moment, then gestured to the sofa. "Sit down, Miss Chen." It wasn't quite an invitation, more like a command, but Emily complied. Alexander remained standing, swirling the liquid in his glass. "You played beautifully," he said finally, the words seeming to cost him considerable effort. "My mother would have approved of your interpretation." Coming from him, it was high praise indeed. "Thank you," Emily said softly. "Where did you learn that piece?" "My teacher at the conservatory assigned it last year. I've been working on it ever since." Alexander nodded, then moved to the desk and opened a drawer. He withdrew a worn leather folder and brought it to Emily, placing it in her hands without explanation. Emily opened it carefully. Inside was sheet music for Chopin's Ballade No. 1, but not a standard published version. This one was covered in handwritten notes, fingering suggestions, and interpretive markings. At the top of the first page, elegant handwriting spelled out, "Clara Blackwood, Juilliard, 1989. "These are your mother's notes," Emily whispered, suddenly understanding the value of what she held. Alexander nodded, taking a seat in an armchair across from her. She annotated all her music, said the composers left roadmaps, but each pianist had to find their own journey through the piece. Emily traced the pencil markings with her fingertip, noticing how some of Clara's interpretive choices matched her own, while others offered completely different approaches. "This is incredible. The way she thought about the middle section." "You played it differently," Alexander noted. "The section after the main theme returns. She used more rubato." Emily looked up, surprised. "You know the piece well." "I heard her practice it hundreds of times." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "I used to do homework in that room while she worked through difficult passages over and over." For the first time, Emily saw a glimpse of the person behind the cold billionaire facade, a boy who had loved his mother, who had grown up surrounded by music. "She never let me record her," Alexander continued, his voice growing distant. "Said music had to be experienced live, that recordings couldn't capture the soul of a performance." He took another sip of his drink. "After she died, I realized I would never hear her play again. Not her voice, not her interpretation. Just other pianists playing the same notes, but never quite the same way." The pain in his voice was so raw that Emily had to look away. She understood now. His reaction wasn't just about a stranger playing his mother's piano. It was about hearing music that connected him to his deepest loss. "I truly am sorry," she said quietly. "I didn't mean to bring up painful memories." Alexander studied her for a moment. "You have nothing to apologize for. Your playing was—" He paused, searching for the right word. "Honest." Technical skill can be learned, but you can't fake the emotion behind it. They sat in silence for a moment, the sounds of the party a distant murmur through the closed door. "May I ask you something?" Emily ventured. Alexander raised an eyebrow but nodded. "Why has no one played that piano since your mother? It's such a magnificent instrument." His expression darkened slightly. "Because no one was worthy of it. Not even you?" Emily asked gently. Alexander's laugh was hollow. "Especially not me. I stopped lessons after she died. Couldn't bear it." Emily glanced down at the sheet music in her lap, then back at Alexander. There was something different about him now. The sharp edges had softened, if only slightly. In this room, surrounded by his mother's things, he seemed more human. "The piano doesn't belong in a museum," Emily said, echoing his earlier words with a different meaning. "Your mother was an artist who shared her gift. I think she would want her piano to make music, not just memories." Alexander stared at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he stood abruptly, extending his hand for the sheet music. "We should return to the party before my grandmother sends a search party." The moment of connection was broken. Emily returned the folder and stood, recognizing the dismissal for what it was. Yet as they walked back toward the main hall, she couldn't help but feel that something had shifted between them. The wall Alexander had built around himself had a small crack in it now, barely visible, but definitely there. And as they rejoined the party, Emily noticed that for the first time that evening, people weren't looking at her as an outsider who didn't belong. They were looking at her as the pianist who had moved them to tears. 2 weeks passed since the night at the Blackwood mansion. Emily had returned to her normal life, taking extra shifts at the restaurant, practicing on her electronic keyboard in the early morning hours before her father woke up, and trying not to think about Alexander Blackwood or his mother's piano. The memory of that night kept resurfacing despite her best efforts. The feeling of those perfect keys beneath her fingers, the shocked faces of the wealthy guests, the raw emotion she'd glimpsed on Alexander's face when she'd played his mother's piece, their conversation in Clara's study, none of it seemed real anymore. Earth to Emily, her coworker Liz waved a hand in front of her face. "Table 12 needs their check." Emily blinked, returning to the present moment. "Sorry, I was somewhere else." "Clearly," Liz said, loading dirty plates onto her tray. "You've been spacing out all week." "What gives?" Emily shook her head. "Nothing. Just tired." The truth was too complicated to explain during the lunch rush. How could she describe the strange sense of loss she felt? As if she'd been offered a glimpse into another world, only to have the door firmly closed again. The bell above the door chimed as new customers entered. Emily grabbed a stack of menus without looking up. "Welcome to River Cafe, table for..." She stopped mid-sentence, the menus nearly slipping from her hands. Thomas Blackwood stood in the entryway, looking distinctly out of place in his tailored suit. His silver hair was neatly combed and his kind eyes crinkled at the corners when he spotted her. "Miss Chen," he smiled warmly. "I was hoping I'd find you here." Emily glanced around the half-empty cafe, suddenly conscious of the coffee stain on her apron and the lingering smell of fried onions in the air. "Mr. Blackwood, this is unexpected." "I was in the neighborhood," he said, though they both knew it was unlikely a man of his stature had any reason to be in this modest part of town. "Do you have a moment to talk?" "I'm working, but..." Emily hesitated, then nodded toward an empty table in the corner. "I can take my break now. Can I get you anything?" "Just coffee, Black." "Thank you." 5 minutes later, Emily slid into the chair across from Thomas, having delivered his coffee and explained to her manager that she needed to take her break early. "I won't take much of your time," Thomas began, his expression turning serious. "I wanted to speak with you about my son." Emily tensed. "If he sent you to warn me off or make some kind of threat..." No. Thomas raised a hand to stop her. "Quite the opposite. Alexander knows nothing about this visit." He took a sip of his coffee, then set the cup down carefully. "Since the night you played Clara's piano, my son has been different, distracted. He's visited his mother's study 3 times, something he hasn't done in years." "I don't understand," Emily said. "What does this have to do with me?" Thomas leaned forward slightly. "You reached something in him that's been buried for a very long time. The music you're playing, it opened a door he's kept firmly shut since Clara died." Emily didn't know how to respond. The idea that she could have affected Alexander Blackwood in any meaningful way seemed absurd. I'm telling you this because I think you should know what kind of man my son really is. Thomas continued. The coldness, the arrogance, that's not who he was before we lost Clara. He was a bright, passionate boy who loved music as much as his mother did. People change when they lose someone, Emily said quietly, thinking of her own mother's death, how it had shaped her in ways she was still discovering. Thomas nodded. They do. But sometimes they get lost in that change. He reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew an envelope, sliding it across the table. This is for you. Emily stared at the envelope but didn't touch it. What is it? An opportunity, Thomas said. The River City Symphony Orchestra is holding auditions for their Young Artist program next month. The winner receives a full scholarship to complete their studies at the conservatory, plus a stipend for living expenses. Emily's heart skipped a beat. She'd dreamed of auditioning for that program, but had abandoned the idea when her father got sick. Why are you telling me this? Because you have extraordinary talent, Miss Chen. It would be a tragedy to let it go to waste. He nodded toward the envelope. The application fee has been paid. All you need to do is submit the form and prepare your audition pieces. Emily finally picked up the envelope, turning it over in her hands. I don't understand. Why would you do this for me? Thomas's expression softened. Let's just say I recognize what it means to put dreams on hold for family. Clara did the same when Alexander was born. He stood, placing a $20 bill beside his barely touched coffee. Think about it. The world needs more music like yours. Before Emily could respond, he was gone, leaving her staring at the envelope with her heart pounding in her chest. That evening, Emily sat at the kitchen table with her father. The contents of the envelope spread before them. The application form for the Young Artist program, information about the audition requirements, and a personal note from Thomas Blackwood urging her to seize the opportunity. You have to do it, her father said immediately. This is exactly what you've been working toward. Emily shook her head. The timing isn't right. We still have your medical bills, and I can't just quit my job to practice for an audition. I'm getting better every day, her father insisted. The doctor said I can return to full-time work next month. And your mother would never forgive me if I let you pass this up. Emily smiled despite herself. Her father always invoked her mother's opinion when he was trying to convince her of something. It's not just that, she admitted. I feel like there's something off about this whole situation. Why would Alexander Blackwood's father care about my music career? Her father considered this, then shrugged. Maybe he just appreciates talent. Or maybe he's trying to make amends for his son's behavior. Does it matter? This is a real opportunity, regardless of where it came from. Emily stared at the application form, the familiar stirring of hope and ambition rising in her chest. It had been so long since she'd allowed herself to want this, to believe it might still be possible. I'll think about it, she promised. The next morning, Emily arrived at work to find Liz waiting for her with wide eyes. You're never going to believe who's here, she whispered, grabbing Emily's arm as soon as she walked through the door. Emily followed her gaze to the back corner of the cafe and froze. Alexander Blackwood sat alone at a small table, dressed in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than Emily's yearly rent. He was reading something on his tablet, a cup of untouched coffee in front of him. He's been here for 20 minutes, Liz whispered. Asked for you specifically. Emily's stomach tightened. Did he say why nope, just that he needed to speak with you? Liz raised an eyebrow. Care to explain how you know Alexander Blackwood? The Alexander Blackwood? It's complicated, Emily murmured, removing her jacket and hanging it in the staff room. Can you cover my section for a few minutes? Liz nodded, still looking curious. Take your time. It's not every day a billionaire walks into this place. Emily took a deep breath, smoothed her uniform, and approached Alexander's table. He looked up as she neared, his expression unreadable. Miss Chen, he said, setting aside his tablet. Mr. Blackwood, she replied, trying to keep her voice steady. This is unexpected. Sit down, please. It wasn't a request. Emily slid into the chair across from him, acutely aware of the other staff watching from behind the counter. Your father came to see me yesterday, Alexander said without preamble. Emily blinked in surprise. My father went to see you. He showed up at my office, quite determined to speak with me. Apparently a hint of admiration colored his tone. Security was confused about how to handle him. Emily closed her eyes briefly, mortified. I'm so sorry. I had no idea he would do that, don't apologize. It was refreshing, actually. People don't often tell me the truth to my face, and what truth did my father tell you? Emily asked, dreading the answer. Alexander's lips quirked into what might almost have been a smile. That I'm an entitled, arrogant man who wouldn't recognize true character if it spilled champagne on me. Despite her embarrassment, Emily couldn't help but laugh. It sounded exactly like something her father would say. He also told me about your situation, Alexander continued, his expression growing serious. About why you left the conservatory. About the medical bills. Emily's amusement vanished. That wasn't his place to share, perhaps not, but it explained some things. Alexander studied her face. My father visited you yesterday, didn't he? Told you about the Young Artists program? Emily nodded, suddenly understanding. You didn't know. No, it seems my family has decided to meddle in both our lives. He didn't sound entirely displeased. But I'm not here about that. He reached into his suit jacket and withdrew a thick envelope, placing it on the table between them. What's this? Emily asked, not touching it. An offer. River City Memorial Hospital has agreed to forgive your father's outstanding medical debt. All of it. Emily's breath caught. Why would they do that? Because I made a sizable donation to their cardiac care unit, Alexander said matter-of-factly. With the condition that certain patients' bills be cleared. Emily stared at him, trying to process what he was saying. I don't understand. Why would you do this? Alexander's gaze was steady, his voice low. Because what I said that night at the piano was inexcusable. Because you showed more dignity in the face of my cruelty than I deserved. And because talent like yours shouldn't be wasted serving coffee to people who can't tell Bach from Beethoven. Emily felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. The weight that had been pressing on her shoulders for months, the constant worry about money, about her father's health, about her abandoned dreams, suddenly lifted. But pride made her hesitate. I can't accept this. It's too much. You can and you will, Alexander said firmly. Consider it reparations if you like, or an investment in the arts. But do not mistake it for charity. They stared at each other for a long moment, neither willing to back down. Finally, Emily asked the question that had been haunting her. Why do you really care? Is it because I played your mother's piece? Something vulnerable flickered across Alexander's face. In part, he admitted, but also because in that moment when you were playing, I remembered what it felt like to love music, to feel anything at all. He pushed the envelope closer to her. Take it, audition for the program. Become the pianist you were meant to be. Emily finally reached for the envelope, her fingers brushing against his as she took it. Thank you, she said simply. Alexander nodded once, then stood. I look forward to seeing your name on concert programs someday, Miss Chen. As he turned to leave, Emily called after him. Mr. Blackwood? He paused, looking back at her. It's not too late, you know, she said softly, to love music again. For just a moment the mask slipped, and Emily saw genuine emotion in his eyes. Then it was gone, replaced by his usual composed expression. Without another word, he walked out of the cafe, leaving Emily holding an envelope that contained her freedom, and perhaps the first step toward his. 6 months later, Emily stood backstage at the River City Concert Hall, trying to calm her racing heart. The sounds of the audience filing in, the rustling of programs, the quiet murmur of conversation. It all filtered through the heavy curtain, adding to her nervous energy. She smoothed the fabric of her simple black concert dress, a new purchase that had felt like an extravagance even with her scholarship stipend. Her father had insisted, though. You can't perform in the same dress you've had since high school, he'd said, pressing the gift card into her hand. The past half year had been a whirlwind. After Alexander paid her father's medical bills, everything changed. Emily had quit her waitressing job, auditioned for the Young Artists program, and earned one of only 3 spots. She'd thrown herself back into her studies at the conservatory, making up for lost time with extra practice sessions that often stretched late into the night. Tonight was her debut performance with the River City Symphony Orchestra, the culmination of everything she'd worked for. 5 minutes. Miss Chen, the stage manager said, clipboard in hand. Are you ready? Emily nodded, though her stomach was tied in knots. She hadn't played for an audience this size since. Her thoughts were interrupted by a gentle hand on her shoulder. She turned to find her father looking handsome in a suit she hadn't seen him wear since her mother's funeral. You look beautiful, he said, his eyes shining with pride. "Your mother would be so proud of you tonight." Emily hugged him tightly. "I wouldn't be here without you." "Nonsense," he replied, pulling back to look at her. "This was always where you were meant to be. I just helped you along the way." He hesitated, then added, "There's someone here to see you," said it was important. Before Emily could ask who, her father stepped aside, revealing Sophia Blackwood. The elderly woman looked elegant as ever in a deep purple dress, her silver hair swept up in a classic style. "My dear," Sophia said warmly, approaching to take Emily's hands in her own. "I wouldn't have missed this for the world." "Thank you for coming," Emily said, genuinely touched. She and Sophia had stayed in contact over the months, meeting occasionally for lunch or tea. The older woman had become something of a mentor, offering advice not just about music but about navigating the sometimes treacherous waters of River City's cultural elite. "I brought you something," Sophia said, reaching into her small evening bag. She withdrew a slender velvet box and placed it in Emily's hands. "Clara wore these at her first major performance. I think she would have wanted you to have them." Emily opened the box with trembling fingers. Inside lay a pair of simple pearl earrings, elegant in their restraint. "I can't accept these," she whispered, overwhelmed by the gesture. "You can and you will," Sophia insisted, using the exact phrase her grandson had used months ago. "Consider them a good luck charm." As Emily carefully put on the earrings, she couldn't help but ask the question that had lingered in her mind. "Is Alexander here tonight?" Something flickered across Sophia's face, disappointment perhaps, or resignation. "I'm afraid not. He sends his regrets. Business in Tokyo." "Of course," Emily said, trying to hide her disappointment. She hadn't seen Alexander since that day in the cafe, though she'd heard about him through Sophia. He'd been traveling extensively, apparently expanding his company's reach in Asia. "Please thank him again for me." "For everything." Sophia studied her face for a moment, then nodded. "I will." The stage manager reappeared, looking slightly harried. 2 minutes, Miss Chen. We need to get you in position." With a final hug from her father and a squeeze of the hand from Sophia, Emily was led to the wings of the stage. She closed her eyes, taking deep breaths to center herself. In her mind, she ran through the piece she would be performing, Chopin's Ballad No. 1 in G minor. The same piece she had played on Clara's piano, the piece that had changed everything. The conductor approached, nodding to her. "Ready?" Emily nodded back, squaring her shoulders. As the conductor walked onto the stage to applause, Emily focused on her breathing, on the music she was about to play, on the journey that had brought her here. The audience's applause rose again as the conductor gestured toward the wings. This was it. Emily walked onto the stage, the bright lights momentarily blinding her. She moved toward the gleaming black grand piano at center stage, taking in the sea of faces watching her from the darkened auditorium. As her eyes adjusted to the light, she scanned the crowd, not sure what, or who, she was looking for. Her father sat in the 5th row, next to Sophia. Thomas Blackwood was there too, a few seats down. Emily spotted several of her professors, some fellow students, even Liz from the cafe. But no Alexander. Emily pushed away her disappointment and focused on the task at hand. She settled onto the piano bench, adjusting its height slightly. The conductor gave her a nod. She placed her hands over the keys and began to play. The opening notes filled the concert hall, soft and questioning. As she played, Emily poured everything into the music, her struggles, her dreams, her gratitude. The piece built gradually, growing more complex, more emotional. Her fingers danced across the keys with confidence born of countless hours of practice. When she reached the thunderous climax, Emily momentarily lifted her gaze from the keyboard, looking out into the audience, and froze for a split second. There, standing at the very back of the hall, was Alexander Blackwood. He wasn't supposed to be here. He was in Tokyo, on the other side of the world. Yet there he stood, still in a travel suit, clearly having come straight from the airport. Their eyes met across the distance, and Emily felt something shift inside her chest, without missing a note. She returned her focus to the piano, now playing not just for the audience, not just for herself, but for him too, for the man who had tried to humiliate her and ended up changing her life, for the boy who had lost his mother and his music in one devastating blow. As the final notes of the piece faded into silence, Emily kept her head bowed for a moment, letting the emotion of the performance wash over her. Then the applause began, growing into a thunderous standing ovation that brought tears to her eyes. She rose, bowing to the audience, to the conductor, to the orchestra behind her. As she took her final bow and left the stage, she couldn't help glancing toward the back of the hall again. Alexander was gone. After the performance, Emily was surrounded by well-wishers, her father, her teachers, fellow musicians, all offering congratulations. She smiled and thanked them, but part of her mind remained distracted, wondering if she had imagined Alexander's presence. As the crowd finally thinned, Emily gathered her things from the dressing room, preparing to join her father for a late celebratory dinner. She opened the door and found Alexander Blackwood leaning against the opposite wall, hands in his pockets. "You came," she said simply. "I cut my trip short," he replied. "Took the company jet back. Nearly didn't make it." "But why?" Emily asked, genuinely confused. "You barely know me." Alexander straightened, taking a step toward her. "Because 6 months ago you asked me a question. You said it wasn't too late to love music again," Emily remembered. Their conversation in the cafe, the last words she'd spoken to him. "Tonight I wanted to find out if you were right," he continued. "If I could listen to that piece, to any piece, without feeling only pain, and?" Emily asked softly. Alexander's expression softened, the mask of cold indifference slipping away. "And I discovered something unexpected. When you play, I don't hear my mother's ghost. I just hear music, beautiful, alive, present." He paused. "Thank you for that." The simple sincerity of his words touched Emily deeply. "You're welcome," she said, then added with a smile, "though I think the jet lag might be making you more sentimental than usual." A surprised laugh escaped him, perhaps the first genuine laugh she'd heard from him. "Perhaps. But there's something else. Something I came to tell you." "What's that?" "I've started a foundation in my mother's name," Alexander said, "to provide scholarships for young musicians who might otherwise never have the chance to develop their talents. Full rides, plus living stipends and performance opportunities." Emily's eyes widened. "Alexander, that's wonderful." "We need a musical director," he continued. "Someone to help select the recipients, mentor them, arrange master classes. My grandmother suggested you might be interested, after you finish your studies, of course." "Me?" Emily was stunned. "But I'm just starting my career. Surely you need someone more experienced." "What we need," Alexander said firmly, "is someone who understands what it means to have music in their blood, but obstacles in their path. Someone who recognizes true talent when they hear it." Emily was speechless. The opportunity he was offering would allow her to help other young musicians facing the same challenges she had, to change lives just as hers had been changed. "There's one more thing," Alexander added, reaching into his jacket pocket. He withdrew a small key and held it out to her. "This opens the music room at the Blackwood estate, the room with my mother's piano." Emily stared at the key, not daring to take it. "I don't understand." "That piano wasn't meant to sit silent," Alexander said, echoing her words from months ago. "My mother would have wanted it played, and I can think of no one better to play it than you." Slowly, Emily reached out and took the key, their fingers brushing in the exchange. "Thank you," she whispered, understanding the magnitude of what he was offering, not just access to a priceless instrument, but entry into the most guarded part of his world. "I should warn you," Alexander said, a hint of that rare smile returning, "accepting that key comes with certain conditions." "Oh?" Emily raised an eyebrow. "Such as?" "Occasional duets," he replied. "I've started playing again. I'm terribly rusty, but—" Emily couldn't hide her surprise. "You play?" Alexander nodded. "Since I was 4. My mother taught me before I started formal lessons." His expression grew distant. "After she died, I couldn't bear to touch a piano. Until recently." Emily understood, Then what a momentous step this was for him. Not just offering her the key to his mother's piano, but returning to music himself, facing the grief he'd avoided for so long. "I'd be honored to play duets with you," she said softly. For a moment they stood looking at each other, the key a small weight in Emily's palm. So much had changed since that first night when she'd spilled champagne on his jacket. They had both been transformed. He by rediscovering the music he'd locked away with his grief, she by finding the path back to her dreams. "Your father is waiting," Alexander said, breaking the silence. "And I believe you have a celebration dinner to attend." Emily nodded, suddenly aware of how tired she was after the performance, how much she wanted to share this moment with her father. "Will you join us?" she asked impulsively. Alexander seemed surprised by the invitation. "Another time, perhaps. Tonight is for you and your father." As Emily turned to go, Alexander spoke again. "Emily?" She looked back at him. "You played beautifully tonight," he said simply. My mother would have been proud. Coming from him, it was the highest praise imaginable. Emily smiled, the key warm in her hand, a symbol of doors opening rather than closing. "Good night, Alexander." "Good night, Emily." As she walked away, Emily realized that what had started as an attempt to humiliate her had instead broken something open in both of them. His grief, her self-doubt. The music that had once divided them had become the bridge between their worlds, and as she joined her father, the pearl earrings catching the light, Emily knew with certainty that this was just the beginning of her story. The prelude, perhaps, to a much longer piece that was still being composed, one note at a time.